The champagne tasted like ashes in Lauren Collins's mouth. Around her, the grand ballroom of the Collins estate glittered with excess, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and men in black tie suits clinking glasses with women draped in diamonds. It was the kind of opulence people spent their whole lives chasing. But for her, it was just another gilded cage. The engagement party was in full swing, a carefully orchestrated display of power disguised as celebration. Her father, Patrick Collins, held court at the head of the room, an emperor surveying his kingdom. Beside her, Caleb Sinclair kept his hand possessively on the small of her back, the pressure of his grip a silent reminder of what was expected. She was his now, his prize. Lauren felt suffocated. She had rehearsed this role her whole life, the obedient daughter, the perfect fiancée. But tonight, the weight of it was unbearable. Caleb leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Smile, sweetheart. Everyone's watching." She forced her lips into a delicate curve, though her stomach churned. Across the room, her father caught her eye, his expression unreadable. She knew exactly what that look meant. Play your part. Do not embarrass me. She was done playing. The plan was reckless, desperate, but it was her only chance. Under the pretense of needing air, she excused herself from Caleb's grasp and made her way through the sea of guests, dodging conversations and champagne flutes. The moment she stepped into the cool night air of the garden, she inhaled deeply, grounding herself. She had minutes. Her bedroom was on the second floor, the window overlooking the side garden. The trellis was sturdy enough, she had checked. The fall wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative, spending the rest of her life trapped under Caleb's thumb. Heart hammering, she slipped into the shadows, lifting the hem of her gown as she hurried toward the house. The music from inside dulled as she reached the window. With a deep breath, she hoisted herself up, the silk of her dress catching on the latticework. One step, two. The moment her fingers gripped the edge of the windowsill, her foot slipped. She barely had time to stifle a gasp before she lost her grip entirely. The impact was sharp and unforgiving. She landed in the hedges below, the rough branches scratching at her skin. Pain shot through her ankle, but she bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. She couldn't afford to be caught. Wincing, she pulled herself up, brushing leaves from her dress. Her head swam from the fall, but she had no time to recover. She needed to move. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Lauren froze. A figure emerged from the darkness, leaning casually against the stone archway of the garden. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that blended seamlessly into the night. Even in the dim light, she recognized him. Dominic Ashford. Her breath caught in her throat. Of all the people to witness her escape, it had to be him. A rival of her father's, a man just as dangerous as he was powerful. If he called for security, it was over. But he didn't. Instead, he tilted his head, regarding her with a look of quiet amusement. "That," he said, his voice smooth and edged with something unreadable, "was quite the performance." Lauren's pulse thundered. Run. She needed to run. But then Dominic took a step forward, hands tucked into his pockets. "If you keep limping like that, you won't make it past the front gate." She stiffened. He wasn't calling for the guards. He wasn't reaching for his phone. What was he doing? "Your father will have half the city searching for you by morning," he continued, his gaze sharp, assessing. "And when they find you, because they will find you, do you think he'll let you get another chance?" She swallowed hard. Of course not. Dominic took another step, close enough now that she could see the glint in his dark eyes. "If you want to disappear, really disappear, you're going to need more than a torn dress and a twisted ankle." Lauren hated the way he was looking at her, like he had already figured her out. She lifted her chin. "And let me guess, you're offering to help?" He smiled, slow and deliberate. "Depends," he said. "How badly do you want to be free?" Lauren's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at Dominic Ashford. Everything about him set off alarm bells in her head, the calculated ease in his posture, the way his dark eyes never wavered from hers, as if he was already 5 steps ahead. She was used to men like him, ruthless, powerful, always playing a game. But what did he want from her? "Why would you help me?" she asked, testing him. Dominic tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering across his face. "Let's just say your father and I have history." History. That was an understatement. She had heard her father curse the name Dominic Ashford more than once, usually in meetings where things were going particularly badly for Collins Enterprises. Whatever past they shared, it was steeped in business, power, and bad blood, which meant she had no reason to trust him. But what choice did she have? She could already hear the distant hum of the party inside, the laughter and clinking glasses, proof that the world she was trying to escape from was still dangerously close. If she tried to run on her own, she wouldn't make it far. Not with her ankle screaming in pain, not with her father's security stationed at every exit. And if Caleb caught her? She didn't want to think about what he would do. Dominic watched her, his silence a challenge. He wasn't rushing her. He didn't need to. He knew she was out of options. Lauren forced herself to meet his gaze. "What's the price?" His lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Smart girl." She bristled at that. "I can make you disappear," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets, as if this was just another business transaction. "No one will be able to trace you, not your father, not Sinclair, not anyone. But I don't do charity work." Of course he didn't. Lauren crossed her arms, ignoring the throb in her ankle. "What do you want?" He took a step closer, and despite herself, she felt the heat of his presence. Dominic Ashford had a reputation for being dangerous, not just in the boardroom, but in every aspect of his life. He was a man who took what he wanted, consequences be damned. "I want information," he said simply. "You've spent your entire life inside your father's empire. You've seen things, heard things. That makes you valuable." Lauren frowned. "You want me to betray him?" Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that what you're already doing?" Her stomach twisted. He wasn't wrong. Running away from Patrick Collins was an act of defiance in itself, but handing over secrets, actively working against him, that was something else entirely. She had spent years trapped in her father's world, watching how he manipulated, how he crushed his enemies without hesitation. She knew the weight of his power, and yet, for the first time, she had a chance to turn the tables. A slow, unsettling thought crept into her mind. If she helped Dominic, if she gave him what he wanted, maybe she wouldn't have to run forever. Maybe she could do something more. Lauren exhaled sharply, shoving down the fear clawing at her ribs. "Fine," she said, the word tasting foreign in her mouth. "I'll do it." Dominic's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. "Good choice," he said. Then, with an ease that sent a shiver down her spine, he extended a hand. "Let's go." Lauren hesitated. Once she took that hand, there was no turning back. But she had already made her choice. Steeling herself, she placed her fingers in his. And just like that, Lauren Collins vanished into the night. The city blurred past the tinted windows of Dominic's car as Lauren pressed herself into the leather seat, her mind racing faster than the vehicle weaving through the darkened streets. She had barely registered the moment he pulled her through the back entrance of the estate, slipping past security like a ghost. No alarms, no shouts, just the quiet efficiency of a man who had clearly done this before. Now, as they sped further from the life she had always known, reality pressed down on her like a crushing weight. She had done it. She had actually run. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap. The adrenaline from the escape was wearing off, and in its place came a creeping uncertainty. She had put her fate in the hands of Dominic Ashford, a man whose motives she still didn't fully understand. "Where are we going?" she asked, breaking the silence. Dominic, who had been casually scrolling through his phone, didn't look up. "Somewhere safe." Not exactly reassuring. He smirked, finally glancing at her. "If I wanted to drag you back to your father, you'd already be there. Relax." Relax. Right. As if she could possibly relax when every second that passed put more distance between her and the life she had known. Or maybe that was a good thing. She turned toward the window, watching as the city skyline gave way to quieter streets. They had left the wealth-soaked heart of the city, the world of private clubs and boardroom deals, and were now entering unfamiliar territory. After another 20 minutes, Dominic pulled into an underground parking garage attached to what looked like an abandoned office building. The moment the car stopped, he killed the engine and turned to her. Inside, now. Lauren hesitated, but the alternative, standing alone in the middle of a city where her father's men were likely already searching, was worse. Gritting her teeth, she pushed open the door and followed him. The building was dark, silent except for the faint hum of machinery in the distance. Dominic moved with purpose, leading her down a narrow hallway and stopping in front of a steel door. He tapped a code into the keypad beside it, and the lock released with a soft click. Inside was not what she expected. The space was modern, almost clinical. Computer screens flickered across one wall, stacks of monitors displaying streams of information she couldn't begin to decipher. A sleek black desk sat in the center of the room, covered in scattered cables and pieces of hardware. And then there was the man standing behind it, Blake. He was younger than she expected, mid-20s maybe, with shaggy dark hair and the look of someone who spent more time staring at screens than interacting with actual humans. His sharp green eyes flicked between her and Dominic, and then he let out an exaggerated sigh. "This her?" he asked, his voice tinged with exasperation. Dominic ignored the attitude. "She needs to disappear." Blake let out a low whistle and leaned back against the desk. "Damn. The princess wants to vanish, huh?" He eyed her curiously, then grinned. "Bet Daddy Collins is losing his mind right now." Lauren stiffened. She didn't like being the topic of amusement, especially when she was still trying to process everything. "Can you do it or not?" she snapped. Blake's grin widened. "Oh, I like her." He turned back to his computers, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Yeah, I can do it. But if we're doing this right, we're not just talking about deleting some records. We need to wipe everything." Lauren swallowed. "Everything?" Blake continued typing, muttering to himself. "Bank records, digital footprint, social security, phone history." He turned to Dominic. "She got a credit card on her?" Dominic flicked a glance at her. Lauren hesitated, then reached into the hidden pocket of her dress and pulled out her sleek black Amex. The moment Blake took it, he twirled it between his fingers like a magician about to make it disappear. "You can say goodbye to this," he said, tossing it onto the desk. "By the time I'm done, Lauren Collins won't exist." Her stomach twisted. She had wanted this, she had begged for this, but now as she watched Blake begin the process of erasing her, a small, irrational panic rose inside her. She was about to become nobody. "Before we go further," Dominic said, breaking into her thoughts, "you need a new name." Lauren blinked. A new name. Of course. She couldn't be Lauren Collins anymore. That girl had to die tonight. Her mind raced. She needed something that felt like her, but also someone else entirely. Someone free. Then, without thinking, she whispered, "Lena Gray." Dominic arched a brow. "Lena Gray?" She nodded. "Lena was my mother's name. And Gray." She paused, her fingers curling slightly. "Gray is neither black nor white, it's in between." It was everything she felt at this moment. Dominic considered her for a long second, then nodded. "Lena Gray it is." Blake let out a low chuckle. "Well, Lena Gray, let's kill Lauren Collins, shall we?" He hit a final keystroke, and just like that she was gone. Lauren Collins was dead. Lena Gray stood in her place, or at least that's what the screen in front of her said. Blake leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles as lines of code scrolled down the monitor. "And that's that. No bank records, no official identity, no phone number. You are now a ghost, sweetheart." Lena barely heard him. She had known this moment was coming, had agreed to it even, but watching the last remnants of her old life be erased sent a cold shiver down her spine. There was no going back now. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "So what now?" Dominic, who had been watching the process in silence, finally spoke. "Now we make sure you stay that way." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if this was just another business deal. Maybe to him it was, but for her, it was everything. She turned to him. My father will come after me. Of course he will. Dominic didn't look concerned. Which is why we need to make him believe you're dead. Lena's breath caught. What? Blake let out an appreciative whistle. Damn, that's bold. Dominic ignored him, his gaze locked onto hers. As long as Patrick Collins thinks you're out there, he won't stop hunting you, neither will Sinclair. But if you're dead, if they have proof, he'll stop looking. Lena's mind raced. You're talking about faking my death. Exactly. It was an insane idea, risky, dangerous. And yet, she wasn't just running anymore. She was strategizing. If she disappeared, her father would keep looking. But if he believed she was gone for good, he would focus elsewhere. Maybe, just maybe, he would lower his guard. And that was an opportunity. A slow, unfamiliar feeling crept into her chest. Something dark, something sharp. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about winning. Lena looked at Dominic, her pulse steady now. Tell me the plan. His lips curved into a knowing smile. He had known she would say that, and that scared her more than anything else. Lena sat on the worn leather couch in Blake's underground hideout, her hands resting on her lap as she listened to Dominic lay out the plan. The idea of faking her death should have terrified her, but it didn't. It thrilled her, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't reacting to someone else's moves. She was making her own. Dominic paced the room, his presence as commanding as ever. A car accident would be too easy to question, too neat. If we want your father to buy this, it needs to be messy, something that leaves just enough behind to be believable, but not enough to confirm anything. Lena's pulse quickened. Like an explosion, Blake, still sprawled at his desk, let out a low whistle. Damn, she really is one of yours, Ashford. Dominic's lips twitched, but he said nothing. Instead, he studied Lena with a calculating gaze, as if assessing just how far she was willing to go. An explosion is a good option. It's violent, unpredictable, but it needs to be convincing. Lena straightened. Then let's make it convincing. Blake raised an eyebrow. You're actually going through with this? She turned to face him, her expression steady. You erased Lauren Collins. I need the world to believe she's gone. Blake exhaled dramatically. Damn. All right then. I'll set up the digital breadcrumbs, leaked messages, credit card transactions, a fake road trip story. We'll make it look like Lauren Collins was running, panicked, reckless. He stretched his arms. Then we make her disappear in a fiery blaze. Lena nodded, determination hardening inside her. She wasn't just running anymore. She was making them believe she was dead. And when they stopped looking, when they thought the game was over, she would be there, waiting, watching, ready to strike. The plan was set. Lauren Collins's final moments had to be chaotic, untraceable, and above all, believable. Every detail mattered. Blake worked fast, leaving a digital trail of Lauren's supposed escape, security footage of a blurred figure at a gas station, a fake credit card purchase at a roadside motel, cell tower pings leading to an abandoned stretch of highway. It all led to one inevitable conclusion. Lauren Collins had died running. The explosion was planned for the early hours of the morning, when no one would be around to witness anything firsthand. A stolen car, rigged to go up in flames, would be found in a ditch off the interstate. The authorities would assume Lauren had crashed, the wreck igniting on impact. No body, no need for a funeral, just a name in the headlines. Heiress Lauren Collins, feared dead in fiery crash. Lena watched from the back seat as Dominic drove through the empty city streets, her heartbeat steady. A day ago, she would have been terrified. Now, she felt nothing. Once this is done, you can't hesitate, Dominic said from the driver's seat. You can't slip up. Lauren Collins is gone. Lena met his gaze in the rearview mirror. I know. But knowing and becoming were two different things. As they pulled onto the dark highway leading to the crash site, she exhaled softly. Tonight she was burying the girl who had lived in fear. And when the fire burned out, only Lena Gray would remain. The stolen car sat on the side of a deserted stretch of highway, the moon casting a pale glow over the cracked asphalt. The air smelled of gasoline, sharp and pungent, soaking into the interior of the vehicle. Lena stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching as Blake double-checked the rigged ignition. Dominic leaned against his own car, watching her instead. "Last chance to back out," he said, voice unreadable. Lena didn't look at him. "I'm not backing out." Blake straightened, brushing his hands off. "Good, because once I set this off, it's going to look like hell itself swallowed this car." He patted the hood. "We made sure there's enough left behind to suggest a body, but not enough for anyone to be sure. Just some burnt personal effects, maybe a tooth if we're feeling generous." Lena swallowed, forcing herself to stay still. She had expected fear, maybe even regret. But all she felt was a strange, hollow sort of clarity. She turned to Dominic. "And what happens after?" His expression didn't change. "You leave Lauren Collins behind." Blake lit a cigarette, taking a long drag before exhaling slowly. "And we set the bitch on fire." Lena stepped forward. She reached into the car, placed the last remnants of Lauren inside. A gold bracelet her father had given her as a child, a designer handbag, a few scraps of fabric from one of her dresses. Symbols of the life she had been born into, now nothing more than kindling. She stepped back. Blake flicked his cigarette into the open window. The explosion was instant. Flames roared to life, swallowing the car whole, heat scorching against her skin. The fire reached toward the sky, thick black smoke curling into the night like fingers grasping for something unseen. Lena watched the fire burn, watched Lauren Collins disappear. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, because the girl who would have done those things was already dead. When she finally turned away, Dominic was watching her with something close to approval. "Welcome to the game," he said. Lena didn't smile, but for the first time she felt like she meant something. The fire still burned behind them, but Lena didn't look back. Dominic's car sliced through the empty highway, the city lights a distant blur on the horizon. The silence between them was thick, charged with something neither of them acknowledged. Blake had taken a separate route, vanishing into the night after ensuring their plan had gone off without a hitch. Now it was just her and Dominic, and the weight of what she had done. She had erased herself. The world would wake up tomorrow to headlines mourning Lauren Collins, the tragic heiress who died in a fiery crash. Her father would grieve in front of cameras, while behind closed doors he would rage, demand answers, pull every string he had to confirm what he already knew. His daughter was gone. Caleb Sinclair. She didn't know what he would do, and she didn't care. She was free. But freedom felt a lot like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at an abyss with no idea what lay at the bottom. Dominic finally broke the silence. "You handled that well." Lena glanced at him. His hands were relaxed on the steering wheel, his posture effortless, but his eyes, those sharp, unreadable eyes, were still watching her, even as he drove. "Didn't realize I needed your approval," she muttered. His lips curved slightly. "You don't, but you have it anyway." Lena turned her gaze back to the road, letting the wind whip through her hair. She should have been exhausted, but adrenaline still hummed in her veins, keeping her awake. She had no home, no identity, no ties to the life she had spent years pretending to love. So what now? As if reading her thoughts, Dominic spoke again. "Tomorrow, we start building Lena Gray." Lena exhaled slowly. "And what does that mean?" Dominic's voice was calm, certain. "It means you stop thinking like a girl who lost everything." He turned onto an exit ramp, city lights rising up around them, "and start thinking like someone who has nothing to lose." Lena didn't sleep that night. Even after Dominic had taken her to a penthouse in the heart of the city, one of his many properties, discreet and untraceable, her mind refused to shut down. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the skyline, her reflection barely visible against the glass. Lauren Collins had been a prisoner in a mansion she never chose. Lena Gray stood in a world of possibilities, but she still didn't know who she was supposed to be. The door to the penthouse clicked open behind her, and she turned just in time to see Dominic walk in, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He didn't say anything as he handed one to her, just watched assessing as always. She took a sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest. "So," Dominic leaned against the kitchen counter, completely at ease. "So, it's time for the real work to begin." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Dominic's expression didn't change. "Turning you into someone who can survive in my world." She studied him carefully. "Your world?" He smirked. "Did you think running away was the hard part?" She didn't answer, but he didn't need her to. He pushed off the counter, stepping closer, his voice dropping just slightly. "You erased Lauren Collins. Good. But erasing someone isn't enough. You need to replace her with someone stronger." Lena lifted her chin. "And you think I'm not strong enough?" Dominic's lips curved slightly, as if she had walked right into a trap. "I think you don't even know what strong means yet." Lena clenched her jaw, but he was already walking past her, heading toward the hallway that led deeper into the penthouse. "Get some rest," he called over his shoulder. "Tomorrow, Lena Gray begins." Lena stayed where she was, gripping the coffee cup a little tighter. Lauren Collins had been caged. Lena Gray was about to learn how to fight. Lena barely had time to process the fact that she had nowhere to go before Dominic threw her into the deep end. The next morning, she woke to the sharp sound of a phone buzzing on the nightstand beside her. She wasn't used to waking up to silence. Her old life had been filled with the constant hum of staff, early morning meetings her father demanded she attend, and Caleb's controlling texts reminding her who she belonged to. But there was no staff here. No scripted schedule. Just a single message on the phone Dominic had left for her. "Penthouse Gym, 5 minutes, don't be late." Lena stared at the words, then exhaled slowly. So this was how it was going to be. She pulled herself out of bed, slipping into the black athletic gear that had been left for her, because of course Dominic had thought ahead, and made her way downstairs. The penthouse gym was sleek, all dark floors and mirrored walls, with equipment that looked far too expensive for anyone who actually used it. But Dominic did use it. He was already there, wrapping his hands in tape, dressed in black sweatpants and a fitted shirt that made it impossible not to notice the strength beneath the usual suits he wore. He barely glanced at her as she walked in. 2 minutes late. Lena crossed her arms. "I don't remember signing up for boot camp." Dominic smirked. "You signed up for survival." He tossed her a pair of hand wraps. She barely caught them. "You spent your whole life surrounded by security," he said. "Your father's guards, his money, his influence. That's gone now. If someone comes for you, there won't be anyone to save you." Lena's fingers tightened around the wraps. She knew that already. She had lived that truth when she realized Caleb Sinclair could do anything he wanted to her. And no one, not even the staff who had practically raised her, would step in to stop it. She was done being powerless. "Fine," she said, unrolling the wraps. "Let's start." For the first time, Dominic looked at her with something that almost resembled approval. For the next hour, he didn't go easy on her. She learned how to punch, how to block, how to stay on her feet. How to use an opponent's weight against them. She wasn't strong yet, she wasn't fast yet, but she was learning. And Dominic? He never let up. Every time she faltered, he corrected. Every time she hesitated, he reminded her hesitation would get her killed. By the time she collapsed onto the mat, breathless and sore, she had learned something important. Lena Gray wasn't just training to survive, she was training to win. Lena's body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Every muscle throbbed from the relentless training session Dominic had thrown her into that morning. But there was no time to rest, because apparently, learning how to fight was only half the battle. She stood in front of a full-length mirror in one of Dominic's penthouse rooms, her reflection staring back at her with unfamiliar intensity. Gone was the girl who once wore couture gowns and played the role of a perfect heiress. In her place was Lena Gray, dressed in fitted black jeans, a sleek blouse, and a cropped leather jacket that made her look sharper, more dangerous. Dominic circled her like a predator sizing up his prey. "Tell me who you are," he said, voice calm but firm. Lena lifted her chin. "Lena Gray." "Who are you?" "Nobody important." A smirk. "Good answer." But then, without warning, he leaned in, his voice lowering to something almost taunting. "And what if someone asks you about Lauren Collins?" Lena froze. Her instinct screamed to lie, to deflect, but hesitation was weakness, and Dominic had no patience for weakness. He stepped back, watching her reaction like a hawk. "That's what I thought," he murmured. "You still hesitate. You still think like Lauren. That's going to get you killed." Lena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then teach me how to stop." A slow, satisfied smile. "Gladly." The next few hours were nothing like the physical training from earlier. This was something else entirely. Dominic taught her how to lie without blinking, how to change her posture, her tone, the very way she moved to match whatever story she needed to sell, how to slip in and out of roles as if she had been doing it all her life. Because deception wasn't just about words, it was about control, and Lena Gray was learning how to take control. By the time they were done, she wasn't just repeating a new identity, she was Lena Gray. Lauren Collins had been a pawn in her father's world. Lena Gray was about to become something much more dangerous. The first real test came sooner than Lena expected. That night, Dominic took her out. Not to a safe house, not to some darkened alley for more training, but straight into the kind of world she had once belonged to. A high-end lounge hidden behind an unmarked door in one of the city's most exclusive hotels. The kind of place where power wasn't just flaunted, it was measured. Lena walked beside Dominic through the dimly lit space, every detail carefully designed for discretion. Plush leather seating, low golden lighting, a quiet hum of conversation between men in tailored suits and women who knew exactly how dangerous they were. It was a room full of players, and Lena was about to prove she could be one of them. A hostess with icy blue eyes approached, her gaze flickering over Lena before landing on Dominic with something close to recognition. "Mr. Ashford," she greeted smoothly, "your table is ready." Dominic nodded once, but Lena caught the subtle way his fingers brushed against her lower back, just for a second. A silent reminder. Stay in character. She lifted her chin, slipping into the role effortlessly. Not Lauren Collins, the trapped heiress. Lena Gray, the woman who belonged here. They were led to a corner booth with a perfect vantage point of the room. Dominic ordered whiskey, Lena a glass of wine. Neither of them spoke until the drinks arrived. Then, without looking up, Dominic murmured, "See the man at the bar." Lena's gaze flickered toward him. He was older, mid-50s, with silver hair and an expensive watch peeking from beneath the cuff of his suit jacket. He carried himself like someone used to being listened to. "His name is Charles Mercer," Dominic continued. "Owns a string of investment firms, most of them fronts for far less legal dealings. He's connected to your father." Lena's fingers tightened around her glass. "Tonight," Dominic said, finally meeting her gaze, "you're going to introduce yourself to him." Lena blinked. "What? You heard me." Dominic leaned back, studying her reaction. "It's time to see if you can really be her." Lena exhaled slowly. He was testing her, pushing her. And maybe she wanted to see if she could do it too. Without another word, she stood, smoothing down her dress, and strode toward the bar. She didn't hesitate, didn't let her nerves show. Because Lauren Collins would have, and Lauren Collins was dead. Lena walked straight to the bar, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She didn't rush. Power was never rushed. Charles Mercer barely glanced at her as she approached, focused on his drink. But men like him always noticed when a woman was near. Lena slid onto the bar stool beside him, signaling the bartender with effortless ease. "Vodka, neat." That made Mercer turn his head. For a second, he just studied her. She felt his gaze move over her, not in the way lesser men did, but in a way that measured, calculated. He was deciding whether she was worth his attention. Lena didn't give him the time to come to a conclusion. She tilted her head, offering a slight, knowing smile. "You don't strike me as a man who enjoys drinking alone." Mercer arched a brow. "And you don't strike me as a woman who approaches strangers without reason." Sharp. Good. Lena lifted her glass as the bartender placed it in front of her. "Maybe I just enjoy good company." Mercer smirked, finally turning fully toward her. "Is that so?" She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "And from what I hear, You're one of the most interesting men in this city. He chuckled, low and indulgent. You hear things about me? Lena shrugged, taking a sip of vodka. It burned down her throat, but she barely reacted. A man like you leaves an impression, and I pay attention to people who matter. Mercer leaned in just slightly. Then tell me, who exactly do you think I am? This was the moment, the split second where the wrong answer could make her suspicious, but the right one would pull him in. Lena set down her drink, shifting just enough to make it seem like she wasn't intimidated, because she wasn't. I think, she said smoothly, you're the kind of man who understands that power isn't about who's loudest in the room. It's about who listens, who watches, and who knows exactly when to strike. For a second, Mercer said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled. A dangerous way to think, he mused. Not many women understand that. Lena met his gaze without flinching. Then maybe you've been talking to the wrong women. Mercer chuckled again, deeper this time. Amused, interested, hooked. Lena didn't need to look to know Dominic was watching her from the corner of the room, and she didn't need his approval to know. She had won. Lena didn't break eye contact with Charles Mercer. She knew the moment she did, the power would shift. Men like him thrived on control, on reading weaknesses, and she had spent too many years being read like an open book. Not tonight. Tonight she was Lena Gray, and Lena Gray didn't lose. Mercer swirled the amber liquid in his glass, amusement still playing at the edges of his mouth. You're interesting, he said. But that much you already know. Lena tilted her head slightly. And what about you? His brow arched. What about me? She tapped a manicured nail against her glass. What does a man like you want, Mr. Mercer? It was a risk, flipping the conversation, putting him in the position of being the one observed rather than the one doing the observing. But Mercer didn't seem irritated. He seemed entertained. His lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Clever, he murmured. I can see why he brought you here. Lena's pulse tightened. He. So Mercer did know Dominic. That meant this wasn't just a test. It was also a message. Mercer leaned in slightly, his gaze flickering toward where Dominic still sat across the lounge. Let me guess. You're his latest investment? Lena didn't react. She took a slow sip of her drink before setting it down, matching his energy. I don't belong to anyone, Mercer chuckled, shaking his head. That's what they all say at first. She could feel the heat of Dominic's gaze across the room, but she refused to look. This was her game now, and she wasn't losing. She shifted her weight slightly, allowing just enough intrigue to dance across her face. You still haven't answered my question. Mercer exhaled as if considering. Then, with the ease of a man who had never once been rushed, he said, I want to see how long you last. Lena smiled. Then I hope you're patient. Because she wasn't going anywhere. Mercer let out a low, approving hum. Then, without another word, he raised his glass in a silent toast before taking a final sip and stepping away from the bar. He didn't look back. But Lena knew what had just happened. She had passed. She took her time finishing her drink before turning back toward Dominic's booth. He was already watching her, expression unreadable. As she slid into the seat across from him, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Interesting choice of words, he murmured. Lena arched a brow. Wasn't aware I needed a script. Dominic smirked, but there was something sharper in his eyes now. Mercer is dangerous. You got his attention. Lena took a slow sip of wine. That was the point, wasn't it? Dominic watched her for a long moment before finally nodding. Maybe you are ready for this. Lena set down her glass, pulse steady. She had been born into a world where men like Charles Mercer and Dominic Ashford made the rules, but she wasn't playing by those rules anymore. She was making her own. Lena barely had time to settle back into her seat before Dominic spoke again. You impressed Mercer. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement, measured and calculated, like everything else Dominic said. Lena lifted her glass, taking another slow sip of wine. I noticed. Dominic smirked. And yet, you still don't understand what that means. She set her glass down, meeting his gaze. Then why don't you enlighten me? Dominic leaned back against the booth, stretching an arm along the leather. Mercer doesn't do idle curiosity. If he's interested in you, it means he's considering whether you're a threat, an asset, or a liability. Lena kept her expression neutral. And which one am I? Dominic studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. You'll find out soon enough. That wasn't exactly comforting, but before she could push further, a man approached their table. Tall. Blonde? A little too polished, the kind of wealth that was inherited rather than earned. His suit was expensive, but the way he carried himself told her he had never had to fight for a single thing in his life. He smiled down at her, like he had already decided she belonged to him. I don't think we've met, he said smoothly. Lena resisted the urge to roll her eyes. I don't think we have. He extended a hand. James Calloway. The name wasn't unfamiliar. The Calloway family was old money, entangled in real estate and politics. Dangerous, but not in the same way as Mercer or Dominic. Lena let her fingers graze his hand, but she didn't offer her name. James's eyes flickered with intrigue. And you are? Dominic, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. She's not for you. The words were smooth, calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to them. James laughed, pulling his hand back. Relax, Ashford. I was just being polite. Dominic's lips curved slightly. You're never just anything. Lena didn't move, but she absorbed everything. The way James's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way Dominic held his posture just a little too still. This wasn't friendly. James turned back to Lena. I'll see you around, whoever you are. And with that, he walked away. Lena waited until he was out of earshot before looking at Dominic. Friend of yours? Dominic exhaled, rubbing his temple. Calloway is a parasite. Lena smirked. He seemed interested. Dominic's gaze flicked back to her, sharp and unreadable. Men like him always are. Something in the way he said it made heat creep up Lena's spine. But before she could analyze it, he shifted back to business. Tonight was a test, he said. You passed, but this was the easy part. Lena arched a brow. And what's the hard part? Dominic leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough to send a chill through her. Making sure Mercer's interest doesn't turn into something lethal. Lena's pulse remained steady, but she understood the warning beneath his words. She had been noticed. Now, she had to make sure she wasn't hunted. Lena wasn't naive enough to believe that getting Charles Mercer's attention was purely a victory. Attention in this world came with a price. She just didn't know what that price was yet. Back at the penthouse, she kicked off her heels and sank into the leather couch, muscles still tense from the night's performance. Dominic stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette outlined against the glittering city. Mercer will come looking for you, he said, not turning around. Lena leaned her head back against the cushions. Then it's a good thing I don't scare easily. Dominic let out a low chuckle, but there was no amusement in it. You should. You haven't seen what men like Mercer are capable of. Lena sat up slightly. But you have. Now he turned, his gaze unreadable. I know exactly what he is. That's why I didn't want him noticing you. Lena's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Then why bring me there in the first place? Dominic crossed the room in slow, measured steps, stopping just in front of her. Because you don't learn by sitting in a penthouse, Lena. You learn by being thrown into the fire. Lena tilted her head. And if I burn? Dominic's lips curved slightly, but his eyes were dark. Then you weren't ready for this world. Something about the way he said it made the air between them shift. Lena knew this was a test. Everything with Dominic was a test. To be continued.